Hi there, I'm Laura Rodriguez. Welcome to Cold Crimes on NBC6, where we explore everything from shocking unsolved murders to decades-old investigations that sometimes lead to closure and resolution. On this show, we will highlight some of South Florida's most bizarre and mysterious cases, all in the pursuit of truth for hundreds of families seeking peace and justice. Today's show will focus on solved crimes. In some cases, our NBC6 reports directly led to an arrest. Viewers, like you, often called in a tip after watching one of our stories, and police are able to track down the killer, sometimes years later, even after the suspect believes he or she got away with murder. We now begin with a case dating back to 1961. For 6 decades, the truth behind a prominent businessman's murder was concealed, but a volunteer investigator made it his mission to solve the case.
That's where she turned.
Paul Novak spent the last 9 years trying to find answers in a murder case that went cold. The attorney and volunteer investigator had been actively working on a 1966 kidnapping case when he stumbled upon the unsolved killing of businessman Joseph DiMare.
It is a crime that could have and should have been solved a long time ago, perhaps even the night of the murder.
DiMare was one of the founders of produce company DiMare Fresh. On March 24th, 1961, his body was found in the passenger seat of his Cadillac Fleetwood, a few blocks from his home in the Keystone Islands of North Miami. Joseph's wife, Frances, told police she was in the car with him headed to dinner.
She had claimed that right here at this intersection, 2 guys jumped into the back seat of their Cadillac and pistol whipped them and forced them to a lot just around the corner here, where she ran to a gas station, and then her husband was found dead.
Joseph's son, Richard DiMare, was skeptical of Frances's story from the very beginning. Frances and Joseph had only been married for about 2 years at the time of the killing.
So there were a lot of problems. My stepmother had left the house 3 times. My father wanted a divorce. So basically, the 4 or 5 days that my father was gone, my stepmother talked to some underworld people about the hit on my father. She also talked to her hairdresser about killing my father, and both of these people said no.
On the day of the murder, Richard was 21 years old. He says he received a strange phone call from his father hours before he was killed.
So my father told us not to come home for the weekend. Well, I mean, that raised some red flags, but we just didn't think any more of it.
Now, 62 years later, Miami-Dade police and Novak say physical evidence and witness accounts show Frances DiMare killed her husband. The motive? An impending divorce and DiMare's inheritance.
He had already changed his will to say that she would only receive her share if she was living with him as his wife at the time of his death. So she had left and gone back to Ohio. She found out about this will change, so she came back to the Keystone house, and it was at that time he told her that he was going to get a divorce, and if she was divorced, she wouldn't get a share of any estate.
There were concerns that she had that she would be out of the will if she wasn't living in the marital home. We know that she wasn't in Miami prior to the homicide, and that when she found that out, she did travel back.
So why did it take 6 decades to come to this conclusion?
What happened back in 1961, none of us were around for. What we can tell you is now, going through the case file, looking at it through our set of eyes and the team that we have been able to come to the conclusion that she is the person responsible.
Sometimes these cases get complicated and derailed by a combination of factors that include corruption, that include intentional derailment of the trail.
Novak says back in 1961, many believed Frances was a victim. She died in 2006 and never faced criminal charges. But Frances did inherit more than $200,000.
This was all about money, prestige, status. After my father died, she remarried 8 months later, divorced that husband, and then remarried again. So no, this was all about money.
Now in his 80s, Richard DiMare says he has mixed emotions about the case and how it was handled, but he's glad he did not give up on his mission to find answers.
I'm relieved on one side, but the pain and suffering that my family suffered.
Prior to the resolution of the DiMare case, the same volunteer investigator helped solve a 1966 case. Paul Novak and a group of Surfside residents embarked on an exhaustive review of Danny Goldman's murder. Their tireless search for clues and information ultimately led to answers.
It was like a humongous onion. You just had to keep peeling it and peeling it to get to the center.
Paul Novak is one of 5 Surfside residents who made it their mission to ensure Danny Goldman was not forgotten. 10 years ago, they formed a volunteer investigative team and reopened Danny's cold case. The group began a relentless search for answers along with the Miami-Dade Police Department's cold case unit.
For 55 years, there were no answers to what happened.
The day before his 18th birthday, in March of 1966, Danny Goldman was kidnapped from his Surfside home. The intruder demanded a ransom, but the call for the money never came.
We have reason to believe that Danny was murdered shortly after the kidnapping, and his remains were disposed of in the ocean.
Novak says the key to cracking the case was a look at the full context of the times.
What other crimes had occurred? Who were the players? Who were the criminals? Who were the law enforcement people? Who were the judges? Who was everybody?
The group and detectives concluded Danny was killed in retaliation because his father exposed a criminal enterprise.
Danny's father had been a board member on a local bank, and he saw banking practices that concerned him as an investor, and he reported them, and there was a federal investigation into the bank.
After years of poring through the evidence, investigators discovered the kidnapper was George DeFeece, affiliated with the Trafficante organization, also known as the Tampa Mafia.
During the course of the investigation, crucial information was obtained that included Mr. DeFeece arriving at the Goldman residence hours before the abduction in a taxicab. In addition, latent evidence and a detailed subject description provided by Aaron Sally Goldman to include a distinct walk that Mr. DeFeece had due to his disability.
He passed away in 1980. And while we can't have him arrested and prosecuted for kidnapping and murder, we can expose the truth about what happened.
The same year Danny's killer passed away, 1980, a murder in the city of Miramar terrorized a mobile home community. 4 decades later, a police detective persisted, reopened the file, and found a DNA match.
Here's the photo of Evelyn.
From England, John Bamforth explained the horrifying scene he witnessed nearly 43 years ago after his wife, Evelyn Fisher-Bamforth, was murdered inside their Miramar mobile home.
It's half of the bed at least was soaked with blood.
Detectives say 32-year-old Evelyn was home alone and asleep when Ronald Richards broke in through a window and brutally attacked her.
She was raped and she also was bludgeoned to death.
3 months after the crime in 1980, Richards became a person of interest. Police didn't have to look very far. He lived in the same mobile home park as Evelyn, but detectives say they didn't have enough evidence to press charges. Then about a year ago, Detective Jonathan Zeller took another look at the case. He says DNA testing showed Richards is the suspect.
I think this is a serial killer.
5 years before he allegedly killed Evelyn, Richards was convicted of manslaughter in Ohio. 3 months after Evelyn's death, he was also convicted of attempted first-degree murder in Volusia County.
There could be potentially other cases out there, and that's what we're working on to find out, if there are any.
I'm not a vindictive person, but I would certainly want to see justice for Evelyn. Yeah. And I don't believe in this closure thing. One never has closure.
Richards is now 75 years old. He is currently in prison in Ohio for violating parole. And now we turn to a case dating back to 1994 where DNA was once again the key to closure.
We give closure to this community. When a murder is committed in any part of this county, it creates a shockwave.
28 years later, a family has received an answer they prayed for. In April of 1994, Lillian DeCloe was murdered inside her Pompano Beach home. Her niece stopped by for a visit and found the 89-year-old dead.
As I looked right, I saw her on the floor.
Detectives say the killer likely entered through a bedroom window. They found signs of a struggle and believe she was strangled to death.
She had contusions pretty much everywhere. Her wrist, her ribs were fractured, her nose was fractured.
The leads dried up until 2019 when BSO's Cold Case Homicide Unit reopened Lillian's file. The key piece of evidence was the elderly woman's nightgown. BSO's crime lab sent a sample gathered from the nightgown to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement for additional testing.
It's a computer algorithm that will do that searching to try and find potential relatives of the profile.
Investigators discovered a match and linked the crime to Johnny Mac Brown. They also learned Brown lived just a few houses away from Lillian in the 1990s.
Then we had to make absolutely sure that we had the right guy before we close out a case.
Brown, a former United States Marine, died in 2010. He was buried in the South Florida National Cemetery. In August, multiple agencies worked together to exhume Brown's grave.
I was able to scoop out part of the bone marrow inside of the rib, and that actually gave me the best profile.
A case closed, and welcome news for Lillian's family after their decades-long journey for justice.
We can move on. We can die in peace.
Detectives say Brown was not on anyone's radar. They're now looking into whether he's responsible for other crimes. Now we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we take a closer look at a brutal murder involving a 15-year-old victim. Stay tuned here to Cold Crimes.